Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are, I guess, in the country or maybe even internationally, based on some of the folks I see coming into the room. My name is David Pavlich. I'm joining you from Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm here as one of the representatives from the Friends of Lorine Niedecker. We're the organization that brought you this reading today. I'm just going to introduce the Friends of Lorine Niedecker, and then I'm going to pass things over to Patrick Morrissey, who's going to introduce Merrill for today's reading. So for those of you who don't know, I think many of you do, but if you don't know, Lorine Niedecker was a poet and located not too far from here, where I am. I'm in Madison. I'm about half an hour away from where Niedecker wrote, and we have some people joining us today who are even closer than that, coming from Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. But Niedecker is well known for having written at Black Hawk Island, part of a group of poets known as the Objectivists, and published in small presses and magazines like Origin, Wild Hawthorne, and Jargon Society. If you're not familiar with Lorine Niedecker's work, the best place to begin is her collected works, which was published by the University of California, edited by Jenny Penberthy. The Friends of Lorine Niedecker, a nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to preserving and expanding Niedecker's legacy. There are lots of activities that we undertake. And this is one of those events. This is a virtual event reading series curated by Chuck Stebelton and Rick Meier, who are both here today. And we'll be starting an annual series of talks that will begin in the fall. And Patrick Morrissey, who's introducing today's reader, is going to give a talk in the fall, sponsored by us. It'll be virtual and freely available as well. If you are interested in making donations to the Friends of Lorine Niedecker, there's a link here, and I can put it in the chat a little bit later. Donations are always welcome. They support activities like these, as well as local in-person activities, publication of the Solitary Plover, which is our newsletter and literary magazine, and other things. So I'm just gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna hand things over to you, Patrick.
Thanks, David. It's really a pleasure to be here. Hi, everybody, and happy Easter to those of you who celebrate. It's great also to see so many familiar folks, names and faces in the audience, our virtual assembly here. It's a real pleasure to be introducing Merrill Gilfillan to you today. He is the author of many books of poetry, essays, and fiction, including most recently Talk Across Water, Stories Selected and New, published by Flood Editions in 2019, Stars Seen Then from Partly Press in 2020, and the chapbook A Walkable Rain, imminently forthcoming from Oxeye Press. Flood Editions will also publish his selected poems later in the year. A reading by Merrill Gilfillan is a rare occasion. This is his first in 10 years. In fact, I have never heard Merrill read his work, and I am filled with anticipation. He's one of my very favorite writers, one to whose poems I return for fundamental refreshment, for orientation and reorientation, for permission and for pleasure. His poems make me want to go for a walk. His poems make me want to write poems. To read just a few of his lines is to dip into a deep, swift river and taste the pure tang of poetry. In few poets' work is the movement from syllable to syllable, word to word, so lively and fine-tuned, and I can think of no poet more alert to the particular textures and complexities of real places in this world, whether in Ohio, on the high plains, somewhere on the Lower East Side, or tucked away in the Appalachians. Merrill is both deeply playful joyfully attuned to the sounds of language, especially proper names, surprises of syntax, and sudden flights of song, and deeply, seriously attentive. Landscape as full context, he writes in his essay Alfresco. Situation, time, space, chemistry, gases, vectors, and winds, surroundings. Landscape writing as a fundamental noticing. And he goes on, if the writing holds, it can function by its very nature as both a naming and a reclaiming, a corrective and a salvaging within the occupying, preoccupying culture. The writing you are about to hear is a serious pleasure. Never imitate a machine, Merrill advises elsewhere, and refuse to be fleeced out of a three-dimensional world. Indeed, in his poems, we find a field guide to a three-dimensional world, written by a real human creature, generously offered to other such creatures. Please join me in welcoming Merrill Gilfillan.
Hello, all. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to the North Central folks for inviting me to join your series. It's a pleasure. As Patrick mentioned, I have a new chapbook in the works, possibly any day now, as they say, and it also has roots in North Central territory, being Madison, Wisconsin, and the able hands of Oxeye Press. That's Oxeye as in Oxeye Daisy and other things, I suppose. So I thought I'd begin today with reading a couple pieces from that book, for the occasion and the timeliness of it all. So it's a slim chapbook comprising mostly a series of short poems that I call suites over just habitually, meaning that they're small items joined, if nothing more than by a morning walk, perhaps. So they're loosely structured, and they sort of began during the pandemic years. So there's some extreme oddities about them. I can always blame it on that, I suppose. But so I thought I would read a couple of those. The first two in the new book, A Walkable Rain is the title of the chapbook, and I'll read the first two pieces from there. The first one being the title poem, A Walkable Rain. The mailman, miles away, traces of sweet basil and rot eddy low in the side streets. An oak like Moby Dick, an elm like Herman Melville. The old hummingbird hobo camp graveyard between Bear Pen and Whisper Creek. Empty times when the heart howls, empty time. Since when? Since the plums turned red, since the hogs ate Willie. Koto music, heavy with child. And will these hills breathe easy then, or not? Or what? Cardinal flower petals, matador, dropped softly on the meadow shore. The second suite is called Frog in the Throat, in numbered sections, but I won't read the numbers. So. When the clouds passed, one of the stylights invited us up. There, off over there, the land of 1,000 dances. People coming over a hill, over and over a hill. Old men hunched with cheroots and bandoliers. All over again, once again. Why the outfielders friendlier than the inn? And sometimes when the wind is so, a song of songs. I know every stream and every grove between the Rio Grande and the Arkansas. a broken pane, days past, those rolling end of summer blackbird flocks seen as hedging speckled gas. Herbst like a belch, otoño like a sigh. October on September, like Achilles, the tossing of the trees and wind whistling through the ear holes of a helmet. The moaning dove puts the dogs to sleep, the butcher, the baker, the sailor to sleep. Time to woo that just so wind again. Lissadell seen from Ben Bulben seen from Lissadell. To see the seer gazing up into the half dome of golden walnut leaves. Uto P. airy. They live in the fancy trees. In spite of everything, the cicadas will be playing at the Somerset Lounge. So that's a sampling of the new little book. It should be showing up in the next week or so, perhaps. Ten years ago, I moved from the West, after many years in the West, various states and areas, with my partner, Rana. We moved to Asheville for various reasons, including a basic change of scenery. I had been in the Appalachians a good number of times in earlier years, but to suddenly find myself living here, I discovered I was going out often with a little pocket notebook and pencil and writing short poems, I think, just to re-enter the region and get a feel for it. Mostly in North Carolina, but also Tennessee, West Virginia, Kentucky, eastern part of Kentucky. So eventually I had a small stack of short poems from the early stages, re-entering the eastern half of the continent, I guess you could say. I realized I was using poems effectively and satisfyingly anyway, as a way of establishing relations with a locale and an entire region. So I thought I'd read a few of those from about 9 or 10 years ago, and step back in time a little bit. The first one is called Hunter's Sky. Beauty too lovely, the 3 thin miles, then turn around to do it again. Birds flush up as leaves drop down. Orange gold trees hunched against slate gray clouds, a hunter's sky. The little road goes round the hills, over and back like a jump rope song. Crows, the birds of paradise, sail by. Blue Ridge, blossoms on the feral trees. Apple blossoms on the feral trees have a light all their own, cool ivory of petals already fallen. 1 mile, maybe 2, north from Bee Tree, a hint of wind nudged through the gap, the slightest sleight of hand. 2 miles, maybe 3, stung ivory, coinage of stars. New leaves on the beech sprouts, silken enough to swaddle a child. The road to High Hat. The many great place names in the inner Appalachians is well worth poring over an atlas for a few hours, but High Hat was a favorite, I guess. The road to High Hat, Kentucky, that is, eastern Kentucky. Sunrise hurt the cat owl's eyes. Crows go to ground in the slim valley, past hard shell, around through soft shells, barnless swallows. Transhumants, older than the hills. Up the mountain in May to see the spindly sourwood flowers. down in the fall with the firelit honey. Even the river stones show early autumn, wet scarlet, sugar maple bronze. Daybreak sky. This is from West Virginia, I believe. Daybreak sky. Sycamores along the Giandot, pretty as a pony, elegant as Appaloosas, fancy as a rare blonde python. Daybreak sky, the gentle colors of a burst persimmon. Coal miner's daughter, scratched out, then coal miner's wife. Black Cove, the Nantahelas, which is a range of mountains in far western North Carolina, south of the Smokies. Midnight Cove with blue gentians in its folds. Birds talk softly in their sleep, as this poem talks in mine. Black Cove, wet gentians ankle high by weak starlight. Locus ceruleus, dark gentian blue, place in the mind. The next one's called Swannanoa, which is a lovely name of a river that runs through Asheville. I'm told it's a Cherokee word, but I've never been able to track much down about it. It does have one term I'll discuss briefly. It refers to a simpler, and the simpler is an old term for a person who either harvests, goes out and finds in the forest, or grows and deals in medicinal plants. It comes from the old word simple, which long ago meant a medicinal plant, in the sense that it was just a cure on its own right and didn't have to be compounded in any way commercially. And the actual term that brought this in was Simpler's Joy, which is the name of a plant, one of the vervains, I believe. And it's such a wonderful sounding name. I got taken with it right away and tracked it down. So this is a local Asheville sort of setting. Swannanoa. Who called that little orchid 3 birds? The Simpler's Joy was on her. Simpler's Joy, as in Dowland's Galliard or Purcell's Pavane. The mountains missing leaves, low sun, pearled, pebbled, bossed, hints of plum, glints of elderberry, almost a calico. Kinglets tumble to green river cane, curious about this crooked little path fishermen use to get down along the stream. Roan Mountain, vireos sing Falling Water. Roan Mountain is up in Tennessee, not too far from Asheville. Those men in the valley shredding lilacs in full bloom. A little too human. Vireos sing Falling Water, steady as yesterday's rain. Swallowtails flit and sip among the fancy poplar flowers 60 feet up, somehow like memory waltzing. Did I ever actually know a woman named Normandy Beach? Abracadabra, sent off out over the mountains to soften the blow. Beach Gap. This has been a very beautiful morning. Aquiline. Rhododendrons trail their fingers in the river. Boys have found a grapevine and swing through the trees. Bloodroot as ginseng sang. But it's not the day the big woodpeckers rose up and drove people out of the mountains. Cradle Knoll. All the bloodhounds in the world touch down. Wardens come from miles around. Last night, a lazy dream, footage of a full range tossing under storm, wild Zydeco wind up from the south via Hurricane Gap, leaves in the air, gullies surging, foaming brick red, Van Gogh's hair, sickle cut, or General Sherman's. Grouse drum on hazy ridges. Down the road, a place called Muse's Mills. White-throated sparrows sing their whisper song. All the bloodhounds in the world can't pin it down. Okay, that's a little Appalachian set.
Merrill, I'm gonna ask you to reposition yourself just a little bit. You're leaning a little bit out of the frame, but
Leaning left.
if you aim for that little bead on the top of the monitor, I think you'll be perfect.
Yeah. Can I turn that? Is that better there?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
It occurs to me that after I read poems like that, that people might sensibly think that I have picked especially bird poems for the Lorine Niedecker occasion. But in fact, I discovered I have more poems with birds, far more than poems without birds. A majority of my poems have birds either flying through them or calling from the wings. I embraced that fate years ago and don't fight it anymore. So, but I thought, in terms of Lorine, if I may, I thought I would read a passage from my book of essays, The Warbler Road, as a warm nod to her. She loved birds in a very casual and friendly, companionate way. I've long had a copy of her poem On Hearing the Wood Pewee tacked to the wall above my desk. So it's been there a decade. So this essay is from the Warbler Road, as I said. It's called The Equipoise. I'm not a scientist. These are not scientific essays by any means. They're more about the aesthetic and of things, going out after warblers and what they're up to and all that. It's set in my native state of Ohio, and I guess it's a salute to the way birds can serve as not only an accompaniment to full life, but even as a sort of nutrient day by day. So I'll read the last couple of pages of The Equipoise. There were birds in good numbers this morning along the Little Miami and Caesars Creek, a generous eyeful. So I decided to move on and drive a bit out of my way to visit a small country graveyard near Ludlow Falls, as I do every few years since my father showed me the place 3 decades ago. Union Cemetery lies back a long, narrow lane off the Horseshoe Bend Road. The plots, many bearing persons born in the 1700s, are pleasantly bordered by mature stands of maple and ash, black cherry and oak. To the west, beyond a wire fence, dense woodland drops gradually toward the nearby Stillwater River. In the southwest corner, under deep grass, is the solitary grave of my paternal great-grandmother, Susan Blickenstaff Pierce, a Quaker woman who came to Ohio from Staunton, Virginia, to raise a Quaker family. Solitary because, as is often the case, she died relatively young in 1895, and her widower remarried and eventually moved from the area. It takes a while to locate the stone and wipe it clean, and each time I do so, I am flooded with the knowledge that I'm the only person on earth who knows its whereabouts and the lineage of its dust, the sole creature standing between the near lost and the lost. But by fortune, it is a good green place with birds usually in it, and sweet williams and bloodroot blooming along the edges. One of those small-scale, very personal sites where, once you have experienced warblers there, you hesitate to leave without a similar endorsing intimacy. It always seems to deserve a bird, even if some years that means waiting for one to show up, waiting and walking the margins for half an hour. One spring there was a prothonotary singing loudly from the woods over toward the river bend. This morning, after a turn or two, I find a methodical palm warbler along the south fence line, a steady, eye-level bird, steady and brightly hued enough to call forth its early name, the yellow redpoll, and the lightly used word equipoise. Later, up in the northwest corner, there are 3 or 4 Tennessee warblers deep in the thickets, rattling and banging their late season songs, a staccato chorus that is somewhere between a racket and a commotion. While the Stillwater stands as a quintessential Quaker name, these Tennessees in concert might just be a bit noisy and agitated for Quaker tastes. But any sort of music is welcome at the moment to liven the memory and quicken the place. Okay. So now I'm going to just read a slew of poems from here and there and various spots, times, places. First one is called All Is Well. A small hawk in the apple tree, eating a favorite junco, Little John, he of the dapper hood and salmon flanks. As for anything involving 2 pianos, the Turkish twins, the Pecanels, are probably the way to go. That little extra double yoke something, which in the realm of mountains you will find in the Spanish peaks. All is well. We haven't had fish for breakfast since the hotel in Skibbereen 2 years ago. Fried place, to be speaking of speaking in tongues. Happy early morning tongues. I'll have the place, fried. Broad white tablecloth. Just outside, the river island runs. Now I'm going to read a few things from Stars Seen Then, a book from Partly Press, came out a few years ago. And I'm going to read a few individual poems from a sequence called The Road to Town. I'll read the final 4 in the sequence. So first one's called Miss September Sullivan, her chaconne. Orioles growl in the half-moon grove. Cottonwood fluff drifts across and down. Could be wet snow through bright sun, if not for the orioles. Poetry some days high overhead like a condor scheme. Other days far below, Courier and Ives from an outbound plane. One Saturday in Rome, as we moved through the Colosseum aisles, a man stood in jacket and tie at the lower wall, addressing the empty arena field. A solid civil voice, urging, impressing, a bit elegiac, as if reasoning with a child. His well-tempered baritone rising and falling, gesturing in the Italian way, tossing, gently sending off the words. People hushed and hurried respectfully by. September muses and their poets on a leash. Knowers and rememberers, Ovid said. Light wind from the east, both fullbacks dead. This is number 6. Cars driving all day over acorns and pig nuts fallen on the road, crackling and popping. The children laughing all day at the endless hours of it. Sidings, seats of the moon, found in a glove box. The waves ran to meet us. Even the ocean loved your skin. Red Start woman. The retriever dove for snapper, brought them in and dropped them at our feet. Ceviche soon. The waves ran to meet them. Jays still talk about it summer afternoons. The next one's a little ode to my favorite river of my childhood and youth, the Kokosing in Ohio. The Kokosing running by, the black dog running by, the rock bass flopping in the grass, ride like cork crumbs in wine. Kokosing, the sinuous verb understood slicing through the big word river. Its picture books birds fly out from, kokosing for an hour, branch to branch, setting off showers of droplets in the sun. Kokosing, 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 a name from Madame Butterfly, a friend of Cho-Cho-san. And the last one's a little note for one of my good friends from Colorado days, Jack Collum, a poet and longtime friend. It's titled, And a Jack. Appaloosa clouds, the wind wakes early. So much of the radio bar talk this morning sounds like worry. And Jack wrote on his hand every day in ballpoint. Numbers, titles, words of high note as we walked all that way with sunflowers in it. Swallows up and out, one by one, to cloverleaf and stamp the very fact of flight. The emerald polar green it's always been, and glints and shimmers, now the rose rare violet. Eyes fly it like a kite. Okay, one more poem from this little set is, no, actually there's some shorties here. Where did I put those? Here they are. I was just going to read a few little shorties that popped up, kind of random from the bag. So they say, Clinch River breeze sugared by honeysuckle, mead speed, so they say. Even the vultures sit resting in the soft May day. As the seas rise, pick and shovel men, hands and knees, unearth the wreckage of a foot-long model old Ironsides, where it went down beneath a certain small Ohio town. Willow Creek, this is a little creek in South Dakota, western South Dakota. Willow Creek. Its willows are coyote willows by the book, and when the coyote slips into their shade and disappears, they wave coyotes' willows. Days lock picked. And back to the streets of Denver for a moment. From their clouds. Old blue Fairlane up beside, waiting at a stoplight no cars pass through. We glance at each other, both feeling mealy under the empire. Although, from any platonic dialogue we gather, know that beauty is moment all kingfishers fly as one, at once, is merely a matter of time in mind, sunlit volley biting. Trees, their clouds, wind licks, falls with autumn thick of things, wet nights, fat stars, crickets singing in jars. And one more shorty called August Evening. When the bats show up, the words drop down to hide. Okay. How we doing time-wise here? Pretty good. Another poem from this little set. It's called Damsels, kind of a little day memory from a camping trip in the Pine Ridge country, western Nebraska. Damsels. By the second day, we registered the damselflies resting in the pines just overhead, felt the many eyes, turned slowly in our chairs. Demoiselles resting in an utter stillness on every other cranny or twig, every tree, copper carmine, blanched lapis, tails hiked in the cool air. And when the wind lifted, the full armada dropped in pure consensus to perch tiptoe on the buds of sage a foot above the ground below. A shift unanimous as leaves in gust. Then up, moments later, back to the pines, the very twig, back to the mine's amino sky. The lacquer blue dropped down to investigate my watch. Touch of a hair. What can they weigh? Moment of the day. To meet the earth so slightly. Needlepoint toes. What can the hummingbirds think? Inca piccolos. Okay, I'm going to shift gear just a little bit now and read a prose poem. I've written lots of prose poems over the years. Since I was 19 and 20, I always loved the genre, as mysterious as it is. But recently I compiled a selected poems, which will be out later this year, Lord willing. And I decided not to put any of them in that book because I just saw all of a sudden poems are poems and prose poems are a different genre. So maybe I'll put a small collection of those together someday. But meanwhile, I like this one. And it's got some birds in it, so I figured I'd read this one. It's from Red Mavis from Flood Editions a few years back. This is, again, the Pine Ridge country of South Dakota and the Nebraska area. Suddenly in the sky. The final days before departing the Pine Ridge country, I went out each late afternoon to the lovely hills along Upper Bordeaux Creek and sat for an hour in the late August change of things, taking in the first of the cool autumn tones and bidding a gradual farewell to a favorite place. One of those afternoons, I heard a plaintive bleat from down the wooded slope and finally saw a youngling goat emerge from the box elders. He had seen me and proceeded straight up the hill, bleating as he came, to stand beside me, obviously seeking simple, non-specific companionship. I guessed he was a castaway. I scratched his brow and ears and stared at his great gold leaf mantis eyes. We sat there a good while, enjoying the camaraderie, talking a little, not much. Just before dusk, all of a sudden, the nighthawks were there. Suddenly in the sky, then more, and I believed I was actually seeing them rise from the pines nearby at the very moment of stirring or takeoff, like the instant of a leaf breaking from its twig. A tribe or family moving out against the pastel sky for the evening's work, gregarious and graceful. They began to hunt, looping and tacking in a loose, unassuming group. Every few minutes they passed above, giving a soft, unfamiliar mutter of a call among them I'd never heard before. Wick, 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 wick. And we looked up as one to watch them go over. Okay. I've got two more poems to read. They're a little longer than some of the others, so I hope we'll be time-wise will be okay. Two of my favorite poems I would probably confide. One from the western U.S., where I lived for many, many years, and the other one from east of the Mississippi. But I'll start with the one called A Grove on the Mussel Shell. The Mussel Shell being a river in central Montana that flows up into the Big Missouri eventually. It's got one little name drop here. I guess I should clarify just a tad. I mentioned Hildegard von Bingen, obviously a person I discovered about the time I wrote this poem. She was a 12th century German nun, philosopher, mystic, composer, poet, and actually a simpler as well. She dealt in some medicinal plants and, the polymath to the nth degree, and wrote lots of wonderful hymns and poems about the joys of earthly life and the earth. So von Bingen, and when I hit that name, you'll know who I'm talking about. A grove on the mussel shell. Thin, scattered, sparkling in the sunbeams, box turned upside down and shaken, 6 grapes, bread, a plug of jerky on spread green kerchief. When I open the goat cheese, strong like carrion, 2 days plus in the cooler, donkeys downwind look up and over, whiff of wondrous, brave new fungus. The mussel shell low and easy. Across the way, a worthy grove, half-leaved, October. Harmonic grove of the old school at full attention. The central tree, the Maharaj, ascends in muscle-bound gradients of 3, lightest, suavest of veerings, through ganglion of all possible design. Onto the freestyle flamenco upper right, where the eye seems always to end. Flare where a kestrel sat in the sun just now. What dear von Bingen might have called a mediator bow. Since I cut back to birds and rivers, life is smooth, days surer, words flow or seep. It doesn't matter that much anymore. The night before, I noticed Painted Robe Creek in the Atlas. Drove out early morning for a look. Slim pickings at first, a treeless bed, lank soldierly hills, pheasants in the stubble. The word forsooth was in my mouth. But a few miles in, the road upstream turned south, and soon there were pines on the slopes. The bottom narrowed, the edges roughened, the road lost shape, not a soul in sight. A threadbare, pensive, storm-gray mare came plodding down the road, and then a stately single file, the rest of the remuda, wild, almost a carnivorous look to their eyes. And that was far enough. 10 miles up or in, turned around and drove back down. The place it meets the mussel shell must be a pretty one. Multiple decades of the name silt. Some other year. But the eye was cast. Penny Ante Valley salted with song. I smuggled that load up the Painted Robe Road and many variations thereon. The pace of time, once so slow, then so fast, slows again. Coefficient of river friction, shallow water over stones. The first bearer of garlic to the northern mountains, a Basque, unknown, herder in a wool coat, speaking the sweet, late Neanderthal. We, the crypto-janitorial we, cut back hard, rivers and birds, and I quote, Tanager talked and talked. and the people liked what they heard. Okay, I moved back across the Mississippi. Another poem based on my native state of Ohio. It's called The Serpent, and it regards the Serpent Mound, a wonderful place in southern Ohio, actually in the hilly part of southern Ohio, unglaciated area, which is actually an northerly outcropping extent of the Appalachians. So it's a lovely country. And the Serpent not only is a site of connection with prehistoric peoples and their doings, but it's also a marvelous work of earth art, totally sophisticated and graceful by all means. It extends about a quarter of a mile along the top of a ridge. Dates estimate from 1000 to 2000, depending on who figures the makers were, but it's been there a while. One of the fine points on the whole continent, in my opinion. The Serpent. The English had a horn they called the serpent, a throaty bass that comes to mind here. The mound, after many consultations, as much pure woodwind as anything. High note held over centuries, with swallowtails through it, and Meiarchus, the snake birds in its tulip trees. A tune you might whistle for someone antipodal and wondering, passing through, when the words tire and it is just pre-June, just post-glamour, but only the cuckoos and the yellowthroats sing, stitch through the day, the steady all-summer songs, unhurried, unfooled. Best to begin at the tail, once you've verified how the whole fits so perfectly along the spine of the ridge high above Brush Creek, follows the quiet, given curve. At the tight coil of the tail, the beginning, the great plan conceived, the talking and the pointing, laying on of hands. And from that cochlea coil out, the creature flows, labyrinth unfurled, elegant as days, spiral yielding wave, gently leftward with the given, calculation held in the clays, culminating in the simple head, schematic gape with what is often called an egg therein, elongate oval at the very prow of the ridge, sharp drop to the creek below, and on all sides the full forests rise, maple, oak, ash and tulip trees, shadow languor, and moist breeze. The snake bird runs it. Weep. One day as a boy, I saw the Sape Mound to the near northeast, under brand new snow, with already a garnish of sledding tracks down the slope and zagged paths back to the top, and knew that that was fitting and proper. But the kinetics here, less for the viscera than for the inner ear. Best to walk it from the tail out, walk through the form, orphan unearthly, rendered earthly, the low note held by sun on stone, and the simple sweetness of it in the end, compared to something like the Sphinx gnawed desert bone, scorched sand, versus cool loam, sugar of sugar maple. From the center of the oval, a red bud grows, and a blue jay paused, homage fire in his eyes, and a tiny egg in its beak, dripping bright yolk dandelion. The early English had a horn, E-I, E-I-O, cuckoo bird and red wren, template and mend. From the shade I hear it as a whistled tune of arms and bridge, a tune for siding with, for standing up and siding with the sun, that seamless fit, daily sidereal on the sycamores, trajectory mend of lovers' intent, the caliber and the carriage of it. Thank you all. Thank you for listening.